Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for being with us today. This is Charlie Sylvia from CLIA, Vice President of Membership and Trade Relations with Cruise Lines International Association, and it's our privilege to have you with us today for our call. Very, very important research to share with you. And this is another of your benefits as travel agency members and individual agent members with CLIA. So without further ado, I'm very privileged to introduce to you Mary Rodino, who is Senior Director of Services Industries for the Americas with J.D. Power. Mary, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Charlie. It's such a pleasure and a privilege to be here today. So yes, we are going to be sharing the results and information for the 2016 CLIA Consumer Study. And I'm so pleased to have with us today Rick Garlick, who is our J.D. Power Global Travel and Hospitality Practice Lead. Rick's going to be sharing some exciting insights, so get ready. Rick, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you so much. And Charlie, it's great to be with you and the folks at CLIA today. As we walk through this data, we want to make it a dialogue. And we know that people who are listening on the webinar are also going to have some questions that they can follow up and send to us. And we are very, very happy to address any questions that come in later as a consequence of listening to the data. So let's, first of all, let's talk about the information. Charlie, if I were to ask you a question, and that is, I know you've read this research and you've gone through it very thoroughly. If I were to ask you in one sentence, summarize what this study says to you, what would that sentence be?
This study makes me very confident about the future of the cruise industry. And for those who work in the cruise industry, both on the supplier side, the executive partner side, and the agency and agent side, makes me very confident indeed. Long sentence.
Let's explore the basis of your confidence. First of all, these are the key findings. We always like to start off with the end of the story and then go back and unpack it. One of the things that we saw in this study, we looked at both cruisers, those people who had taken a cruise sometime in the past 3 years, along with those that took some other type of land-based vacation. And we asked both groups, essentially, tell us what the best vacation you take would happen to be. And they said the people that took a cruise said that overwhelmingly the best type of vacation that they took was a cruise, especially for relaxing and getting away from it all. So if you try it, you'll like it. We also show that cruisers, interestingly enough, also show high levels of satisfaction with their vacation experiences and rate ocean cruise vacations higher than land-based vacations. So when we tend to be basically people who like to take more vacations than the general population. And when they compare the cruises that they take to other types of land-based vacations, they have a significant preference for the cruise experience.
I think it's because it's more of an experience, quite frankly. Less static.
Do tell.
Well, just because, you know, in a land-based resort, it's wonderful, but everything is static, you know. The scenery is static. The experience is somewhat static. But with the cruise travel experience, what you're getting is you're getting an ever-changing environment. And that's one of the things I love most about cruising.
Excellent. So you said when I asked you that question that you're very hopeful about the future of the cruise industry. And I think that this next data point really is the basis for the confidence that you have in the future of cruising. We looked at generational cohorts, the so-called millennial generation that we talk about so much. Now, in our definition, we call those Gen Yers, and we basically start that off at anyone 39 years and younger. So there's millennials incorporated in those, but also people who are slightly older who are sort of on the following end of that Gen X group. And I loved when we were talking about this, I loved the phrase that people came up in the meeting, calling that group Generation Cruise.
I loved it too.
and why we love that is that these are people under 40, and they, as we'll see in the data, tend to have the highest preference for cruising among any of the groups that have taken a cruise and reported their experience in our study. And so contrary to the dated stereotype, cruises aren't just for old people. But young people love them too.
And quite frankly, there's so much for young people to do on a cruise, both on the vessel and at the ports of discovery.
Absolutely, and we'll actually talk about why these young people like it so much and how it fits into a lot of the work that we at J.D. Power have done on understanding the millennial age generation. Here's another finding that some people might find a little interesting. You tell me if this is something that surprises you or not, that ethnic minorities, African American, Asian, Hispanic, strongly prefer cruises to other vacations.
I found that a little surprising. I didn't realize there'd be a correlation there.
Yeah, I don't think that we typically think of cruising as much of a diverse experience as it perhaps is from an ethnic standpoint. Cruisers are also very loyal, that if you've taken a cruise, more than 90% of that cruising population say they'll cruise again. So whether they do or not, we know that at least 9 out of 10 will like it enough to say that if given the opportunity, I'd do it again. And we do see that there is a lot of experience among those cruisers, that the average cruiser has taken more than 5 cruises as an adult, although as I mentioned before, they often take land vacations as well. So there are people who just seem to love to take a lot of vacation time.
You care to guess, Rick, how many cruises I've been on?
I don't know if I should guess high or low.
Well, as a child, I've been on 8 cruises, but then as an adult, you can add 73 more to that. So it's been 80. I'm going on my 82nd cruise on Saturday.
Well, offline after the webinar, I want you to tell me about the best cruising experience that you had. Get your insights. Now, it's interesting. The question is that if people love cruising so much, why doesn't everybody do it? Well, the main obstacle for cruising among those who take land-based vacations and don't necessarily consider a cruise is the perception of high cost. Now, there's also questions about health and safety when on a cruise vacation, and we know that there's been some highly publicized situations where people have had negative experiences, although a very, very small minority of people who go on cruise vacations have any kind of negative experience. It seems like those are the ones we tend to hear and tend to be amplified.
And when you look at the factual data that CLIA provides to our members when working with the consumer, the factual data is all on our side in terms of safety, security, health, and sustainability. So while there are instances, they are very, very rare indeed. And when you really look at the facts, and this is cited data, you see that cruising is the safest vacation option out there.
So it feels to me that that's a real opportunity for the industry to continue to get that message out.
It is.
Well, good. Cruises are also better when enjoyed with others. So those examples of a love boat where the singles would come on, probably a bit contradictory to what the actual ideal cruise experience is when you come on with friends and family members. And we see that in the data that cruisers rate the experience much better when they share with family and friends. So that's, I think, again, an opportunity to really promote that sense of togetherness, and that it really is a family experience in many respects. And again, some good data to show and support that point. And I think that this is one of the findings that really, I think, surprised me a bit, that children are often involved in the decision process more for cruises than other type of land-based vacations. So the kids really tend to have a big influence as far as planning the cruise experience.
But you know what, that's been my experience as well, being a travel agent. I've been a travel agent for 23 years, and I see that when it is a cruise, you're exactly right, the whole family really gets involved in it, and the kids are especially excited and enthusiastic about the cruise because there is something for everyone. As part of the cruise experience, they all want to be involved in the planning process.
The other interesting thing is that more so than land-based vacations, cruisers really book their experience way ahead of time, typically more than 6 months before the trip date, whereas nearly half of land-based vacations are booked 3 months before. So is that a good thing, Charlie?
Well, it's a great thing because travel agencies and agents are able to forecast their business. And during the time period, so if I book a cruise today for someone who's traveling in 9 months from now, I have 9 months to sell cruises to other people as well in the meantime. So it really helps an agency and agents build a pipeline of business. I can tell you, Rick, that I have my next 2.5 years worth of cruises booked already. So cruisers are planners. That doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, I look at that. I think it's great for the industry. I just think some people, like for example, if you ask me to tell you what I'm doing 6 months from now, I can't tell you what I'm doing 3 weeks from now.
Sure.
And so I wonder if that is a good thing or not such a good thing for certain people as a barrier or a facilitator of the cruising experience.
Well, for cruising, there are other factors to be taken into account. I book my cruises so far in advance so I can get the best airfare, and so I can have the best hotel availability for my pre-cruise night. So there's a lot of things that are involved, and also the anticipation is half the fun. I think that's just my point of view.
That's a great perspective. So for trip planning, non-cruisers typically rely on travel companions, recommendations from friends and family, destination websites, travel information websites, all the places where people typically go. But what's interesting is that cruisers not only rely on these information sources, but others, including social media networks, travel guides, travel magazines, travel blogs, travel apps, and
most importantly,
a big part of your audience, the travel agents. Correct. And not surprising given that travel agents are more involved with gathering information and assisting with final travel plans for cruises than for land-based vacation. Cruisers report high levels of satisfaction with their experience when travel agents assist with trip planning. Now, one of the things that we learned from our industry studies that we do in the travel industry as a whole, and this is not surprising given this total picture, is that younger millennials are starting to use traditional travel agents much more than their other older generational cohorts. And some of the speculation is that millennials just like having someone do it all for them and give them this sample of experiences, because millennials really are experience junkies, and who better to provide the perfect smorgasbord of experiences than a travel agent.
And I think millennials are also really super in tune with getting the inside scoop. And I think that that's something that travel agents provide them. There were a number of studies that were out there in the past that showed exactly what you just said, that linked their usage, their increased usage of travel agents to the fact that the money was more important to them at that earlier start of their life. But, I don't dismiss that. There's certainly validity to that. But I think it's more that they want to get the good information so that they're able to have the most unique, authentic experience that they can have.
Yeah, and I think also, and again, no disrespect to millennials, getting someone to do the heavy lifting as far as the work and the planning.
Who doesn't like that?
Well, I think, again, it's just you sit back and then you get to enjoy the experience. So that's good news for the travel agent industry. The cruise duration is also positively related to age, although the 8-day cruise is the most popular across all generational cohorts. We see that younger cruisers are more likely to choose the shorter cruises. Traditionalists or olders are more likely to go for the longer cruises. Now, some suggest it's because when you're younger, you have less money and you don't have the time to take a 2-week cruise that you do when you're retired. So perhaps that particular finding is not a surprise.
And you know what, there may be a shift there one day because, let's face it, cruise ships are now becoming more connected than ever. And Wi-Fi is getting really, really good on cruise ships. So for those millennials that work remotely, they might be able to take longer cruises.
Excellent.
Check into the office more.
And then also we see that in terms of the ethnic market, they really do exhibit similar preferences in terms of cruise choices and length of cruise, but the African American market also tends to take the shorter cruises. So again, if I'm planning cruises, I'm planning the marketing experience of certain demographic groups or age groups, perhaps that's some good insight as far as what the ideal experience looks like for those particular groups. And then also when we look at the certain destinations that people look at, the popular travel destinations, again, not surprising for anyone in the industry, Alaska, reviewed out of the Caribbean, Mexico, the Mediterranean, and then Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands. So again, that probably confirms what a lot of people already knew who are in the industry, definitely. I think this ties into that millennial message as well, that the vast majority of cruisers see cruising as a good way, to basically plan later trips and sample destinations. So it's interesting that the millennials and the Gen Xers, that generation cruise, in particular, like this benefit to cruising and are more likely than older cruisers to have done either a pre or post-cruise stay in a port city or return to a visited destination first experience on a cruise. So it's the opportunity to get a nice little sampling of different experiences so you can determine what you like and then come back for a more extended experience. And also another trend in the industry is the home porting trend. And it shouldn't surprise us that's very valued by cruisers who view more embarkation points as convenient and cost saving. So you don't necessarily have to fly to Vancouver or Fort Lauderdale anymore.
I live in Providence, Rhode Island, and I could drive to Cruiseport, Boston, or I could drive to any number of the ports down in New York and New Jersey. So that's tremendously valid at that point.
Excellent. And again, the main benefit to cruises versus land-based vacations is the opportunity to see and do new things. And back to this millennial message just a bit, you know how people will say that the millennials would rather have a cruise experience than buy a new car or buy something big. And that whole notion of taking the selfie and posting it on your Instagram or your Facebook. My nephew had saved up $5,000 for a World Series ticket. And again, some people, older generations, might look at that and say, oh gosh, what can you do for $5,000? But millennials are really focused on those experiences. So what a great way to see all these different things and have that taste develop for more.
It's true, and quite frankly, I've traveled with a millennial group back in 2015. We had a group of about 50 people, and about 5 or 6 of them were in the millennial. And you know what? They considered the ship a means of transportation. It was a transportation platform to take them from experience to experience. But by the end of the cruise, they felt that the cruise itself was an experience as well, and it was a unique one. So that was really heartening.
And also, looking at those age cohorts, they differ in terms of the attributes that most influence their purchase. So the millennials, the young folks, they are focused on price value. Again, probably having less money, being less established in their careers. They are looking for that good deal. For Gen X and Boomers, ports and destinations. And here's the interesting one that we thought really popped out, that for those older cruisers, it's programs for children and families. So the older cruisers are taking their families, their grandkids, and their kids on these trips.
That's what's important. They want to bring the whole family together, and those programs are very important because they serve the other generations.
Absolutely. And finally, we thought this was interesting. There are notable differences between what cruisers say are the most important amenities on a cruise and what they actually use. So we thought this was a bit of a funny finding, that when you ask cruisers what's most important for your experience on a cruise, it's that there are programs for children and babysitting services. But they tend not to use these amenities as much as onboard entertainment, casino gambling, shopping, fitness, and pools, and that's what they actually use.
And when I read this, it put a smile on my face because it's so true. There were kids in our last group, and they checked out the children's program. They had a couple of, but they didn't really connect with the children's program because they wanted to stay with their parents. I mean, there's going to be cases of give and take regardless, but they had so much fun, and the parents wanted the kids to be with us. So it's great. But then, of course, I've seen instances where the kids just make friends in the children's program, and
well, what we think is funny about this is that we always talk about social desirability and how you respond to surveys.
Yeah.
And of course, if you're a parent, the most important thing is that there are services for your kids and babysitting. But in actuality, you're going for the gambling and the shopping.
I always want to make sure that there's a nice gym on board. Do I ever see it? No.
All right. So those are the key findings summarized. Now let's go to some of the particulars. As we mentioned, this study was actually fielded not long ago in August. It's starting to turn cold, but August was just a few months ago. And we looked at a sample that we got from a consumer panel. To qualify for the study, you had to have an income of $50,000 or more household, and you had to have traveled to take a vacation in the past 3 years. So you'll see that we had about an even split of cruisers and non-cruisers. And we wanted to make sure that there was enough representation in cruising so that we could really break out the particulars. But almost an even split, 792 cruisers to 813 non-cruisers. And we really think this is important because obviously the bigger sample sizes you have, the more flexibility it gives you to look at different breakout groups, and the more statistical power and accuracy and validity behind the study. So we think that the CLIA did a really nice job helping us design the methodology and the sampling. And we also weighted the data to make sure that it reflected the 90% U.S., 10% Canadian mix for North America, which is about what the actual proportion of the cruise population is for North America based on previous work and studies that I think you've done and we've looked at as well. When you look at the sample income, I think this is a bit telling. When you look at cruisers and non-cruisers, you can see that they differ a bit in household income. So, you know, the people who seem to be less affluent are more likely not to cruise than the people who are more affluent. So, for example, you see that the bulk of the cruising population, you know, falls into that $100,000 plus category. And again, I think one of the issues that we'll talk about here and that the industry certainly can address is that cruising may not be as expensive as people think it is.
And that's exactly it. When you really crunch the numbers, it's all about value. And when you consider everything that's included in a cruise, what you're looking at is an overall tremendous value in comparison to a land-based vacation. So there's a lot more bang for the buck when it comes to cruising.
So let's look at satisfaction and loyalty. How do people feel? So we asked the question, what's the best overall vacation that you can take? And you look at you know, the categories, and you see that when you're a cruiser, you know, you really tend to say more often than not, 2/3 of the time, the best type of vacation is either a cruise vacation, ocean voyage, or a river cruise vacation. So you compare that to, you know, some of the people that take other types of vacations, you can see that once you try it, you can't go back. You got to do it again. And again, you see the likelihood of booking a cruise for the next time. When we look at, you know, the definitely wills, you can see again, particularly among male cruisers, 2 out of 3 say I will definitely book a cruise for my next trip. And when you combine the definitely wills and the probably wills, again, you've got almost like over 90% say that there's an intent, some intent to do it again among men, and pretty close to that, you know, among women as well. So you can see that there is a bit of differentiation among the different racial groups, but I think it's interesting, again, that if you're Black African American or Latino Hispanic, your probability of saying I'll definitely come back again is even higher than if you're, you know, in the white Caucasian group. And again, you can see sort of down here the millennials, 63% of that group say they'll definitely come back, 69% of Gen X, and then you see it drops off with the boomers and the traditionalists, that people who are younger have that higher intent to repeat their experience. When we look at Net Promoter Score, and this is a concept that some people are familiar with, some people are not. It's a popular term that's been used in a lot of guest loyalty and customer satisfaction research, where what you do is you take the proportion of people who say, I will definitely recommend a cruise experience, and then you subtract the people who say, I definitely would not recommend, and you come up with what we call a Net Promoter Score. It's an advocacy metric that shows, you know, the entire scale that we use for our intent to recommend item. And when you look at who's got the highest Net Promoter Score for cruising, again, I find this fascinating, Charlie, is that Black African Americans have the highest Net Promoter Score for recommending cruises to others.
Yeah, it's significant, 73.
Yeah. And then, again, who's next? Millennials, 61%. Wow. Highest intent to recommend among the millennials. And then, again, you can see that the income categories seem to follow where you'd expect. The people who have higher incomes are more likely to recommend a cruise experience to others. But I think the two findings that really strike me here are the fact that younger people and some of the ethnic minorities that we might not think about as having such an interest in cruising, that they are the strongest advocates of the cruise experience.
That's an opportunity for travel agencies and agents, because, and especially with the millennial, the Gen Y or Generation Cruise, let's face it, they're just getting started. And if you can convince a millennial to take a cruise, it looks like you're going to have a lifelong client.
Yeah, we do a lot of work in the travel space, and there's so much focus right now on that whole millennial group because they represent not only the customer of today, but the customer of the future for the next foreseeable decades. So I think your opening comments about your optimism for the cruise industry, you can see why. And as we become a shifting country as far as minority influence, ethnic minority influence and presence in the country, I think there's just tons of opportunities for growth here that people may not even be aware of. So let's look at the things that influence choice. So whenever you ask people, okay, essentially what's the most important factor in influencing your vacation choice? Destination for cruises is by far the most influential factor. So you can have a great onboard experience, but you got to have a good destination, right?
Oh yeah, and there's over 1,000 ports of what we call at CLIA, ports of discovery. There's more than 1,000 of them worldwide today.
When you look for the non-cruisers, they tend to be much more cost conscious. And again, not to say that destination doesn't play a role there, but you can really see that there's a significant difference in terms of how cost influences my vacation choice.
And I think what drives that cost consciousness among non-cruisers is the fact that they haven't experienced the value of cruising. I mean, let's face it, a land-based vacation is far more of a nickel and dime experience than cruising. Mm-hmm. Cruising at the heart of cruising, you will get your food for free, or not for free, but included in the price. In the price, you will get your food. You will get your entertainment. Sure, there are a bunch of different opportunities to further enhance your experience with specialty dining and so forth, but at the core of it, all of your essential needs are included within a cruise vacation. So it's a compelling argument.
So when we look at asking, are these types of vacations better or worse for the following reasons? You can see that the number one reason that people really believe that cruising is a great way to experience a relaxing time is the 88% say that cruises are better than land-based vacations for relaxing and getting away from it all. Wow. So I think about that, and it gets into a little speculation on our part here, but again, I think it's because so much of the experience is planned out for you because of the cruise directors. I mean, you get on the ship, you pick your ports, your embarkations, the things you short off, your excursions. That's the word I was looking for. And yet, you just basically get on that ship, and the ship takes you where you need to go. You don't have to stress out being in a car. You don't have to worry about your flight being on time or being delayed or connection missed. You can really see that that's a primary advantage. And then being hassle-free, offering something for everyone, being easy to plan and arrange, being pampered. Do we see a theme here?
My shoulders start to drop just as the ship moves away from the pier. The stress just melts away. It's great now that you're able to be connected, but by the same token, I love getting away from it all. I'd love to not be connected.
Yeah, that's fine. And then when you look at, we mentioned this up front, the attributes that most influence your cruise purchase, obviously trip ports and destinations, as we mentioned, and then the itinerary, the cruise ship side, some of those. But price and value, as you can see, is something that really does differ by generational group, and you can see that, as we mentioned before, the whole notion of programs for children and families, that really is an attribute that influence 88% or 87%, excuse me, of those older travelers. So most of those folks are not going by themselves to bring in their families.
And it means so much to them. That's the thing. The families reunions that I've put together over the past two decades, they're organized by the grandparents typically, and it means the world to them. So I can see why that makes sense.
And then benefits of cruising for visiting destinations. As we ask the questions, do you consider cruises a good way to sample destinations for non-cruise vacations? And you can see 96% of those Gen Ys, the millennials, the generation cruises, say yes, absolutely. And it tends to drop off a bit by age. And then what I love is you typically extend your vacation by spending a few days in the port city. And you can see that who's really driving that? The Gen Ys, the millennials. So cruising, as I look at this data, to me it just strikes me as it's really good for involving young people in the travel industry as a whole.
It is. It gives them the exposure to multiple ports on the same trip. I mean, heck, I just came back from a cruise in July and August. It was a 2-week cruise, but we visited 9 ports, you know, so where else are you going to do that on one trip?
And then when we looked at the length of the cruise, we mentioned this before, that what are you most likely to take in terms of length of cruise. You can see that there is, as we mentioned, some variation by age, where if you're older, 16 days or more, you're typically 49 years of age on the average, but then the younger folks tend to take 3 to 5 days. So as we had a little bit of an internal discussion about that, we talked about the fact that millennials still may be in an early stage in their career. They don't have the time off. They don't have the money. But, you know, again, you get hooked on it while you're young, and then somebody will say, like you, I've been on 73 cruises.
Yeah, and then you show these clients the fact that if they help organize groups, the benefits there. Maybe they can go, maybe they can earn their cruise by working with the travel agency and help promoting a group of their cohorts.
And obviously cruises are very great incentive travel rewards as well.
Yes.
And so there's another thing that's very motivating in the workplace. Just one other thing about the slide that's interesting. You look at, again, the African American group that we talked about, how they really tend to be very strong advocates for groups. So 52% of them took a cruise that lasted between 3 to 5 days. So they tend not to cruise for as long a periods, but those short, impactful experiences tend to really drive their loyalty and their advocacy and the desire to return. Here's, again, the slide that we talked about earlier that's fun. You know, when we ask you basically the amenities used on a cruise, you can see versus the amenities that people said were most important. And you can see, once again, some interesting discrepancy. So, for example, you go up babysitting services, 37% say that that's a really important amenity. 9% use babysitting. Programs for children under 13, a little better. 36% said that they were extremely important. 18% actually use them. So
what strikes me is the one on the pools and jacuzzis. Look at the reversal there. 29% that said
I don't care,
and 60% use it. Yeah. I spend half the time I'm on the ship in a pool or a hot tub.
Well, let's do the same here for some of these others. Casino and gaming. Now, only 29% said that they're important. 44% use them. Onboard shopping, 29%. 44%. Health club and gym. Now, I think this is interesting because 28% said they were important, and 42% actually use them.
Wow, so that's counterintuitive.
Yeah, I was going to say, sure, I got to have my workout. And in this particular case, people don't particularly ascribe a lot of importance, but actually are a bit more disciplined than we might expect. And it's probably those millennials, those young people that are really in good shape. All right, so travel planning. Let's look a little bit here. So, essentially, who does the research and who actually decides the final travel plans? And you can see where the big gap here is that the people who are cruisers, the big differential here is children under 18 years of age, that there's a huge differential between cruisers and non-cruisers at 10%, that 15% of cruisers say that their kids help them research the experience versus only 5% of non-cruisers. And then when you look at the people who actually decided the trip, other than yourself, your spouse or your partner, but you can even see again that it's interesting that you are less likely to perhaps have your spouse make up the final decision if you're a cruiser than if you're a non-cruiser. So I don't know what that says, but I think it's interesting that there are a lot of other influences other than simply consulting with your significant other. And then when we look at the duration of time that people plan the cruise experience, you can see a huge difference here in terms of planning the experience. If you're not a cruiser, 46% plan it 1 to 3 months before, whereas if you're a cruiser, you're way out ahead. And I think, again, we've talked a little bit about that already, but I think that, again, that's an interesting dynamic. If you're an advanced planner, cruising is good for you. I know I had a friend call me recently and asked me if I wanted to go on a cruise with him next January, and I said, I have no clue what I'm doing next January. So for me, that's I think why I brought up the point earlier. But he says, well, if you don't decide now, that cruise is going to be sold out.
Well, that's just it. I mean, the ships don't go out empty. They go out full. And, you know, gone are the days of getting that last-minute cabin, really. It's about planning, and it's about getting the gang together, and the more the merrier. One of the biggest reasons, and sorry to jump in, but
that's all good.
It came to mind. One of the biggest reasons that I think people plan cruises so far in advance is because, and this is important for travel agencies and agents, is because they want to bring other people. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm planning something a year in advance and you bring it up at a cocktail party or dinner party or what have you, you can bring more and more people, and it just adds to the fun.
Mm-hmm. Great. And we look at also, you know, the sources that influence vacation choices. This is the finding that we referred to at the beginning that shows you how much more influence travel agents are, and travel agent recommendations. 21%, cite travel agent recommendation as a influence in their choice of a cruise experience, whereas only 6% of non-cruisers cite the travel agent recommendation as an influence for their land-based vacation. And you can see travel blogs and even television commercials seem to be more influential for influencing the cruise experience. So they look to a wider variety of sources, but that travel agent, that expert, really seems to be a much more significant factor in determining the cruise experience. All right, and then let's talk about travel agents a bit more specifically. You know, whenever you're a cruiser, how often do you use a travel agent to plan your trip? The 35% of people that take a cruise say always. Well, so 1/3. People who say never, 62% of non-cruisers never use a travel agent, whereas much smaller proportion of people that use the cruise experience, 21%. Now, how often do you use a travel agent to book your trip? As you can see, much greater use and frequency of travel agents to book a trip as opposed to land-based vacation takers who only say, 60% of the time, I never use a travel agent.
And to be perfectly candid, right, Mary, this is a huge opportunity here, because not only is it a huge opportunity from a cruise perspective, but also for the agents who sell both cruises and land-based vacations. Because I would dare say that a lot of these nevers, and some of the time, especially the nevers rather, are the people who don't realize that travel agents don't cost the consumer any money. Mm-hmm. And so that is the fundamental message that we have to drive through to consumers day in and day out, that travel agents provide tremendous service and don't cost a dime for the most part.
And I think the other side of that too is that, as we've seen over the last decades, travel agents have become a bit more marginalized by the airlines and some of the suppliers of services, and this shows the important role that they play in directing traffic to those suppliers. And so I think this is good data in terms of the travel agency industry showing its merit and its value to the suppliers of travel services.
Absolutely.
So we're always happy to help out our constituents. And then satisfaction, and here's the other one, satisfaction with travel agents for trip planning. You can see that in terms of courtesy, knowledge, overall satisfaction with the travel agent, much higher when you use them for a cruise experience. And travel companions, let's look at this for just a bit. Looking at the people that take different folks along with them, you can see that when you're a cruiser, you're much likely to take your family. That's the big takeaway. Much more likely to take your family. And then also the accompanying parties. It's interesting that the total number of cruises that you take as an adult, typically 5. You certainly beat that. Number of cruises taken in the last year, 3 days or longer. You can see that about 3 to 4. The number of cruises taken in the past year, 3 days or longer, that included a cruise is basically 2 vacations a year. So, and you can also see people typically take about 3 to 4 people with them. So, and most of the time, their spouse and kids. And then when you look at, I think this is interesting too, when you look at the satisfaction levels with who you traveled with, that you can see that when you travel by yourself, you're still satisfied, you still have a good experience, but not quite as good as if you took people with you, right? And the people that you're most happy with, I think this is interesting too, is when you take your adult children.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then your spouse, of course, up there as well. So, kind of bringing this to the finish line, let's talk about the implications of the study. So what does this mean for the industry? First of all, cruisers love cruising, and once you convert the experience, you're likely to cruise multiple times. So the challenge is, how do you motivate those cruisers to become first-timers? The research indicates that, essentially, the first-timer market has matured in North America. So cruise marketers really need to focus on, in my opinion, our opinion, the following: breaking down the long-standing objections to cruising, one of them being price, right? The others being the health and safety issues, things that you've just refuted statistically at the beginning of the conversation. Creatively communicating product benefits to cruise novices. So, the whole notion of this is an opportunity to see and experience the world, and sample a lot of different experiences that you would never otherwise, in any other circumstance, have the opportunity to try. Offering new value bundles to first-timers while enhancing value for repeaters. So we talked about the value, and we know that younger people, they value those experiences. So my nephew, who spends $5,000 for a World Series ticket, if you ask them, do you get great value, he'd say absolutely. So again, how we define value is not necessarily related to price, it's due to the quality of the experience. And then simplifying the decision process. So making sure that, that's where the travel agents really play a big role, is that, you do this, we take care of everything for you.
And I think, Rick, that it's vitally important that suppliers, and the vast majority of our cruise lines do, direct consumers to a travel agent, to a CLIA-affiliated, experienced travel agent, a trusted travel agent, because I think it's tremendously important, especially with the first-timers, to get them started on the right foot and make sure that they're getting the best advice that they possibly can, and they're not out there on their own. And also that fourth bullet, simplifying the decision process, that's huge. Mm-hmm. The travel agent will know what category of stateroom the client should take based on the qualification of that client, getting to know that client. They'll know what deck it should be on, how close should it be to the elevator, that sort of thing. So hugely important. I sold many of my cabins, many of my bookings by saying, I found you a stateroom in a great location. We don't want to lose this one. Let's button this up. So it is simplifying the decision process.
Well, and then also, as we talked about, and we don't want to beat this horse too extensively, but the key North American growth market for targeted product development and marketing communications, millennials and younger Gen Xers and ethnic subcultures. So I think anybody who's stood on this webinar can see so much overwhelming data to support why that's such a strategic implication of the research. Cruise marketing also should highlight the social benefits of cruising and how the experience is ideal for the multi-generational families. So again, I think when we looked at this data for the first time and we saw how important those children's programs were to those older folks who would take cruises, it really did kind of drive home the point, and when we saw the data about satisfaction and who you travel with, that these experiences are best enjoyed with others and the people that are closest to you, particularly if you're older, your younger family members. And then given the fact that preferences for longer cruises increase with age, we can appeal as marketers to various age cohorts by showcasing the varied length of an itinerary. So if you're thinking about targeting millennial, what's the 3 to 5 day cruise that you can put together that would have the most impact for that particular generational group? If you're looking at marketing toward traditionalists, you're thinking 2 weeks. How can you keep people entertained for a 2-week cruise excursion? And also reinforcing that cruising is a very convenient way to travel, nearby home ports and popular destinations that can be sampled for a varied vacation experience as a means to test locations and return visits by sea or land. So again, this is particularly salient for those younger cruisers who say to themselves, I want to see the world and I've got time to do it, but let me see what I want to see.
Cruising allows them to put 4 or 5 pins into that map, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Each and every time.
Creating that bucket list early.
Yeah.
So marketing messages can also be tailored for age cohorts in terms of cruise attributes that most influence their purchase process. So we know that value for the millennial is critical. So if we're marketing millennials, we got to talk about the value proposition. If we're talking about marketing to older folks, we got to talk about the destination supports. If we're talking about those grandparents, we got to talk about how this is a family experience and it offers something for everybody in the family, right? So the message differs depending on who our target market is, but something for everybody. All right? And then the cost of cruising that we talked about, the key objection, which really reinforces the need to better communicate that value proposition in terms of benefits and per diem rates. The industry should really address those concerns we talked about right at the very onset about, cruising experiences, and also avoid confusion about onboard amenities that are not included in the cruise fare. So I think sometimes we always look at the whole notion of, did people feel as though there were billing issues or whatever? Well, they're never billing issues, or rarely billing issues. Most of the time, it's you're being charged for something you didn't know you were being charged for. So then finally, the cruise decision can be challenging, and your cruisers using a variety of information sources to inform their choice. So simplifying that process, especially through online resources, permit potential cruisers to make more confident choices to whatever channel provides the most efficient decision path. So we've seen some key messages. Just wrapping it up and summarizing it, I think my going away message would be that there's some markets out there that maybe represent some untapped goals for you as a cruise marketer, a travel agent, that who knew that younger people were so into cruising, and for many logical reasons that aligns perfectly with everything we know about the millennial, the desire for experiences, the desire to sample things, the desire to have people sort of take care and plan the experience for them. All those things make them an incredible target market.
And I think that based on my own personal experience, the main takeaway from the millennials that I've spoken with was the authenticity of the experience. They loved the authenticity, whereas before they had cruised, they thought cruising was an artificial environment, that it wasn't a real experience. And then that was their common feedback denominator, was how authentic and how real the experience felt to them. So I think there's huge growth ahead of us, and I'm just really grateful to you, Rick, and Mary, and the entire team at J.D. Power for putting together this incredible amount of research.
Well, thank you so much. And again, we don't have an email address here, but if someone wants more information,
they can simply contact CLIA at info@cruising.org. Again, that's info@cruising.org, and refer specifically to the 2016 CLIA consumer research that was conducted by J.D. Power. And we'll be happy to get the information that they need to them as soon as possible.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure working with you and having this conversation, and we look forward to many more conversations on this topic in the future.
It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.